is it we enjoy being scared? We all dread those sleepless nights of anxiety and fear that something evil or not quite human may be lurking in the shadows. Things that in our rational minds we know couldn't possibly exist, but terrorize us in our nightmares. But then again, why is it that horror is one of modern man's favorite entertainments?
Horror originated in myths and legends, superstition and folklore. And for centuries, our ancestors would huddle in the safety of their firelight to keep the darkness at bay. It was believed that the shadows were filled with phantasms, ghouls, and lost souls. In the blackness, simple fears took on grotesque proportions. At sunset, the dead would leave their graves. The moon could turn the mildest of men into beasts. Monstrous fiends wandered the night and spirited their victims away to inescapable hideaways. And once man was enlightened to the fact that all this was the result of ignorance, literature and later films abounded in horror. With the revival of interest in classic and Gothic horror, filmdom's most creative talents are working to give the audience what it wants, an hour or two of unrelenting terror. Fogs and mists, graveyards and far-off lands, those are the trappings of true Gothic horror.
I must leave you now.
Where are you going?
To find Stirba. She is responsible.
I want to go with you, Stefan. I want to make sure that what happened to my sister never happens to anybody else again.
When do we leave?
Immediately.
Where do we have to go to find Stirba?
To the dark country. To Transylvania.
Good afternoon. A lovely room for the lady and gentleman.
In literature, the classic age of horror began in the 1800s. And by the end of the century, the movies were invented, and horror and this new form of entertainment had an almost immediate rapport.
Jean Mellier, a magician-turned-filmmaker, thrilled turn-of-the-century audiences in Paris with his short trick films. And more often than not, they dealt with the fantastic or bizarre. He also explored the macabre and became the father of special effects along the way. In 1919, Germany broke ground with the first classic horror feature, The Cabinet of Dr. Caligari. And in 1925, Hollywood established the true genre with The Phantom of the Opera. The lavishly mounted production had some scenes shot in earlier attempts at color photography, but it is Lon Chaney's chilling portrayal and unequaled makeup that makes this film still able to raise some gooseflesh 60 years later.
classic film was made here at Universal Studios and helped inspire filmmakers around the world to conjure up monsters, fiends, and the supernatural.
There is one creature of the night that has appeared in more movies than any other. In fact, in over 1,000 films. The vampire. English mystery writer Bram Stoker created what has become the popular concept of vampirism in his 1897 novel, Dracula. Stoker based his character on a 15th century Transylvanian nobleman known as Vlad the Impaler. Then, by mixing folklore and fact, he evolved his creation into the embodiment of evil with a thirst for human blood and the supernatural ability to take on other forms. The 1922 German film Nosferatu was the first major film to deal with vampirism. The basic storyline was clearly lifted from Stoker's Dracula. But this film's Count Olaf did not have the aristocratic presence of Stoker's creation, but personified a malignant pestilence. A parasite that rises from his coffin to feed on the weak and innocent. Most of us, when we think of vampires, remember those atmospheric Hollywood films of the 30s and 40s, and of the wonderfully strange charisma of Bela Lugosi. In the same year that Lugosi was making the original 1931 Dracula, Danish director Carl Dreyer gave us a decidedly different approach in Vampire. Vampirism is a sickness of the soul, and the female can be just as deadly. Vampires are not the only fiends that rise from their graves at nightfall.
Look! Zombies! Yes.
Also known as the undead, the walking dead, and the living dead. In films, zombies never quite caught on. That is, until they developed a rather unsavory appetite for human flesh in the 1960s. Recently, some talented individuals took on the task of bringing new life to the living dead.
Dan O'Bannon, who wrote Alien, Blue Thunder, and Dark Star, called me one stormy night and approached me about working on his new project, The Return of the Living Dead. Dan had written the script, and it was going to be his first picture as a director. I jumped at the chance because I know Dan's reputation for visual richness in his films. And the first problem I was approached with was designing a cemetery. The film is set in Louisville, Kentucky, so it gave me a chance to design a very old cemetery. We wanted the cemetery to be very melodramatic, almost super melodramatic. For our cemetery site, we found an old olive grove out in Silmar, and it was my job to convert that olive grove into a very believable cemetery, a very spooky cemetery. One of the things that makes this zombie picture look different from all the other ones is that we have very different zombies. We really weren't going so much for gore. We were more interested in when these zombies died rather than how they died. We've got zombies going back to the Civil War. We have Southern Belles. We have World War I soldiers, World War II soldiers. We've even got one zombie in this film, Tarman, who I think probably is the scariest creature ever seen on film. I've got a picture of him right here that I better not show to the audience at home. It may just be too intense.
Or just as terrifying, we ourselves may be the victim of a curse or an evil force that brings on a transformation from within. In Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, it was suggested that we all have something monstrous inside. That man contains both good and evil. Dr. Jekyll found a way to separate them. There have been over 50 film adaptations of Robert Louis Stevenson's classic novel, and this is the one horror story that attracts the screen's greatest actors. John Barrymore is the star of this 1920 version, and it's still considered to be one of the best. One interpretation of Hyde is that he is a throwback to a primitive, unsocialized brute. Barrymore's Hyde is a vile manifestation of wickedness. The true horror is Jekyll's, when he can no longer control his inner demon. Werewolves, with their basically human form, came to the screen quite early on. Lately, we've been rushing to theaters to be frightened by an amazing cast of creatures.
Recently, due to innovators like Dick Smith and Rick Baker and Rob Bottin, we've come up with something called special makeup effects, and that's what we do here. In designing a character for a motion picture, first you start with a sketch. This is a sketch of a troll. From the drawing, I went to a sculpture. From the sculpture, I created a mold. In our casting process, we normally use a flexible casting agent. In this case, we're using polyurethane foam and latex. Creates a very flexible, lifelike skin. After the casting process, our mechanical armature is inserted. And through a series of cables, we can do some fairly refined movements, such as moving fingers, moving entire hands, and articulating things in a very delicate fashion. After the mechanics have been inserted, the painstaking painting and hair application takes place. We use a rubber cement-based paint that's extremely flexible. In creation of the final troll, we create a number of creatures that all look alike, but are capable of different and separate functions. Each one is mechanicked to move in a specific manner. One can roll his eyes from left to right, another has full rotation, another can blink, another can snarl, another can frown. After the creatures are fabricated, we bring them onto the set, and there our technicians puppet the creatures as we did in the motion picture Ghoulies.
These and other new technologies have certainly benefited the ghost story. Spectral figures, paranormal activities have gone from the quaintly creepy to the truly spectacular. Luckily, men like Dr. Venkman, Dr. Stanson, Dr. Spengler help us keep all this in its proper perspective.
Okay, so she's a dog.
What ultimately makes these nightmares so appealing is that we are in control of these phantasms and monsters. We simply have to close the book, let the lights come up in the theater, and good has once again vanquished evil. The creatures of the night, the fiends from the shadows dissipate. All is restored. That is, until someone else takes us on another journey into the deepest, darkest recesses of their imagination.